Hello everyone, I am Dr. Sarah Rosanel from Maimonides Medical Center, and I have the pleasure being here to interview Dr. Peter Libby, cardiovascular specialist at Brigham and Women's Hospital and Manning-Crott Professor of Medicine at Harvard. Thank you, Dr. Libby.
It's a pleasure to be here, and it's an honor to address the fellows in training.
Thank you. So today we're going to speak about the secondary analysis of the CANTOS trial. Can you tell me more about it?
Yes, well, actually, the late-breaking abstract is going to be presented by the principal investigator, Dr. Paul Ritker, and at the same time, I'm giving the Braunwald keynote talk here, so I won't be able to attend. But it's very nice of you to ask me to talk about CANTOS and this sub-study, which will be presented for the first time today. So CANTOS, as you know, was the first trial to actually show that a direct anti-inflammatory therapy that doesn't affect the lipid profile can reduce cardiovascular events. And CANTOS targeted a pro-inflammatory cytokine that I've studied for 3 decades, interleukin-1 beta. And I work with Dr. Ritker on leading this study, and I think most people know the primary endpoint. That there was a reduction in cardiovascular events. And actually, in the people who responded to the drug, there was a greater than 30% decrease in cardiovascular mortality and in total mortality. So that was the bottom line of CANTOS. But, you know, who has inflammation? And who responds more poorly to lipid-lowering therapy? It's the patients that you see in consultation and I see in consultation with chronic kidney disease. One of the only places where statins have failed is in advanced renal disease. So early on in mining the data from the CANTOS trial, we published a study which showed that those who had stage 3 or 4 chronic kidney disease actually responded better to the anti-inflammatory agent than those with eGFR greater than 60 with normal renal function. And that sort of begged the question, is inflammation as important as LDL or even more important? And that's what today's data shows us, is that if you have advanced kidney disease, at least stage 3 or 4 kidney disease, in CANTOS there were really over 1,000, about 1,100 patients who were included who had the criterion for reduced renal function, and they responded very well to the anti-inflammatory therapy. And when you segregate the contribution of LDL and chronic kidney disease, actually it looks like inflammation is more important in the chronic kidney disease population within CANTOS than those who had normal renal function. And that really had to do also with cardiovascular mortality and overall mortality. So those are the data that will be presented today.
This is wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing that with us. So then can you tell me how in clinical practice this will affect us?
Well, as I mentioned, in the patients that you and I see and our audience sees with chronic kidney disease, statins and further LDL lowering, while I do it, doesn't seem to be as potent as we would like in improving cardiovascular events and reducing the recurrent events or first events in this very vulnerable population. And so what can we do to address inflammation in this population? Canakinumab, for a variety of reasons, is not available to us as a cardiovascular drug, but we're very interested in targeting one cytokine downstream of interleukin-1 beta, and that's interleukin-6, which I've been working on since before it was called interleukin-6. And we have very strong human genetic evidence and observational data that interleukin-6 is causal in coronary artery disease and atherosclerotic events. So we're very interested in targeting that chronic kidney disease population who doesn't respond as well as we'd like to LDL lowering with a novel monoclonal antibody directed this time against interleukin-6, not interleukin-1 beta. We hope that we'll be able to have a greater safety profile because we're going one step distal to interleukin-1 beta, which is a central primordial pro-inflammatory cytokine. And in CANTOS, we did pay a price with increased infections. So in a phase 2 study that's called RESCUE, we showed that there were profound decreases in C-reactive protein, over 90% drop in C-reactive protein when we administered this antibody that targets interleukin-6 to patients with stage 3 or 4 chronic kidney disease. So that was the prelude to a large-scale clinical trial that's being led by Dr. Ridker that's called ZEUS, which is going to call the question of whether we can improve the residual risk in our important, very vulnerable population with chronic kidney disease. Now, why chronic kidney disease? Well, we know we have colchicine, and we have 2 large-scale studies that show benefit of colchicine. The key, it's in the patients with impaired renal function that we need to be very careful with colchicine. Absolutely. So we're trying to address a huge unmet medical need, and in a patient population that we don't have an anti-inflammatory for. Bottom line is, let's stay tuned. Clinical trials are a risky business, but I've been very fortunate in the environment where I work with a large number of wonderful clinical investigators to take my basic science work and translate it into the clinic. So let's stay tuned and hope we can provide some benefit for this very vulnerable population in the future.
Thank you so much, Dr. Libby. This is amazing and inspiring. Now, for fellows in training and early career attending, what would you recommend for us interested in preventive cardiology? Why is it a field that you think we should go into? I personally love it, but I want my audience to also hear it from you about preventive cardiology.
Well, I think that the fellows have to follow their interests, right? But if you look globally, we've been through the epidemiologic transition. Such that in the developing and lower income countries, cardiovascular disease is growing really at a rapid and frightening pace. So communicable diseases, until this pandemic, have been receding, and with increased public sanitation and vaccination, we've been able to conquer some of the things that really limited life in a huge part of the world, much greater than the wealthy countries. So there's an enormous opportunity for us in cardiovascular prevention. We know so much, we have a lot to learn, but we have today tools, and we need to learn how to implement them. And implement them not just in people who are advantaged, but also in the greater number of individuals who are at risk for cardiovascular disease who don't have the economic resources or the cultural and structural resources for prevention. So I view it as, yes, we have a lot to learn about prevention, that's what we were just talking about, but also in implementation science, we need to take what we learn and make it more broadly available, particularly in this crazy world that we're living in. We in the medical profession and in medical investigation have a responsibility to think broadly about how not just to increase human knowledge, but to improve public health globally.
This was a wonderful session. Thank you so much, Dr. Libby, for being here today with us with the Feet on the Go. You can have more information if you go into the YouTube channel on Feet on the Go. Thank you so much for being here with us today. What a privilege.
Okay, and thank you for the opportunity.